Welcome to the Climate Show with me, Tom Heap. Today it is all about making stuff and powering stuff without cooking the planet. We are in Hull, on the Humber estuary. We're here because this city and this region are beginning to turn the tide on climate change. If they succeed, it shows some of the most polluting industries can be cleaned up. If they don't, well, you get the picture. Offshore in the North Sea, some of the world's largest wind farms are taking shape, and many of them are made here. But so much of the big business on Humberside is dirty business, in climate terms at least. Power stations, chemical plants, refineries and steel mills, like it or not, still pillars of our economy. A full 40% of the UK's emissions from industry come from this patch, and greening them will be the hard yards of decarbonisation. So, can it be done? Well, later on we'll hear from a local environmental champion alongside a renewable energy entrepreneur. And I'll be putting it all in context with the help of our own science guru, Tom Clark. But first, I take a look along the banks of what could be a river of redemption.
For hundreds of years, the people of the Humber estuary have driven economic opportunity in fishing, whaling and then as a coal-fired powerhouse. If green tech and renewable energy is really going to revolutionise our dirty industries, it's got to happen at scale. And these turbine blades give you a clue that that's happening. They've made close to 2,000 of them here. This one is 81 metres long, but by the end of the year, they'll be producing them at 108 metres. This is the Siemens Gamesa plant right next to Hull city centre. They used to export coal from this dock, but now they ship turbine blades across the world and closer to home.
These blades will be in the UK, actually, in Scotland, and the single turn of the turbine will power a house for around 24 hours.
They opened in 2016 and employ around 1,000 people. 200 more posts will be created within a year.
It's so amazing that people can go home, they can say what they've been doing at work, and that they're actually making a difference. You know, clean energy for generations to come.
These things feel fairly futuristic, but any further innovations?
Yeah, I mean, already this year we've made the first recyclable blades that are out now in a wind turbine farm in Germany, which is really exciting. We're already, as a company, looking at hydrogen production through wind turbines as well.
As the UK government has promised to quadruple offshore electrical power generation by 2030, growth looks assured. But as the wind doesn't always blow, it can't do the whole decarbonising job.
This is probably over 10 times bigger than this wind farm that you can see in front of us.
This new gas-fired power station upriver will be the most efficient in Europe, and it's a step in cleaning up old industries like chemicals, refineries and ports. The long-term idea of the Humber Industrial Cluster Plan is to capture and bury carbon dioxide before switching to hydrogen as a fuel. But it's a way off. We've been talking about carbon capture and storage for at least 2 decades now. We've got a brand new power station and it hasn't got it fitted. Why not?
Well, because there wasn't the infrastructure, the policy, the frameworks in order to be able to actually build a carbon capture and storage plant. There's no pipework, there's no transport, there's no depleted gas field to be able to do that right now.
So do you honestly believe that the fossil fuel leopard is changing its spots and can become climate friendly?
Absolutely, otherwise I wouldn't be in this job. You know, when I look at my children, when I look at my 7-year-old and my 3-year-old, I want to tell them I was part of that change. But the fact is you need flexible power. You need to be able to switch the lights on when the wind isn't blowing, when the sun isn't shining.
But when it is shining, the smart people of Hull are making more of it. So sun, solar panel, but what's new here?
Well, solar panels normally just convert sunlight into electricity, but what's truly novel here is we're capturing what would normally be wasted heat energy and recirculating it back into what could be a domestic heating system.
So I've never thought of that, and I've got panels on my own roof that are making a lot of wattage, but there's heat there as well, is there?
Absolutely, yes. A normal panel will only convert about 20% of that solar energy into useful electricity. What we're doing here is capturing that typically wasted 80% of energy and converting it into something useful.
This panel, which produces both electricity and heating, is just one idea from Aura, the low-carbon innovation hub spun out of Hull University, which provides a workshop space to fill the gap between ideas and industry. Here, They are strength testing bioplastics. They've even developed a low-carbon air conditioning system used for cooling computer servers, which has slashed £53,000 off the council's energy bills. It uses evaporation, similar to human sweating.
And for the man who has everything, they're also working on this, an open-top electric tank, possibly more useful for low-carbon farming.
As industries decarbonise and inventions appear, Hull could be on track for the future.
So a low-carbon transition happening in business, but what about home life? Is the message crossing the threshold? Well, to talk about this, I'm joined by Jordan Brompton from green tech firm My Energy and Martin Budd. He's in charge of the climate change brief at Hull City Council. Well, 75% of the 166 wards in this city are ranked among the most deprived in England. So, Martin, people don't have a lot of cash to spend on this change. Are they engaged?
They are, yes, and you're quite right. It's a real challenge within the city in terms of the level of deprivation. But at the same time, people are very proud of the city and very proud of the changes that are happening within the city. And obviously, the Sims Gamesa plant is a really big show of actually how decarbonisation can make a big difference.
And what have you been able to do in the council in terms of actually people's homes?
We've been able to do quite a lot, actually. We've done a lot of work in terms of our own houses. So we own 26,000 homes within the city. So we've done all the cavity wall insulation within the roof, but also we're doing external insulation, putting that insulation on the outside of people's homes, and installing PVs, so photovoltaic panels in some of the homes as well. And also it's about actually making sure the homes are as energy efficient as possible. So it's a real challenge in terms of what we've got to do.
Jordan, tell me a little bit about My Energy. What is it you do and how does it kind of fit into this overall picture?
Yeah, so we're a tech business. We design and manufacture eco-smart products that go in the home, predominantly homes with solar panels or an electric vehicle. And our whole mission is to decarbonise heating and transport, and it's our sort of system that makes
Give
all
me an
that work
example of how
together.
those would work. What would that tech do, for instance?
So if you've got solar panels, or you can divert your surplus power to a hot water tank, giving you essentially a free hot tank of water. Or if you've got an electric vehicle, you can use the solar on your roof to divert to your car battery. If you don't have solar, you can use cheap green energy tariffs.
And what's the recent change been like for your company?
It's been dramatic. We've experienced rapid growth, which shows that
How rapid?
Rapid, very rapid. So we've gone from, in 2017, shipping 20 to 30 products that we manufacture ourselves to this year, 3,000 a week.
3,000 a week?
Yeah.
And what about employees?
We've got just coming up to 400 employees now in the UK, and we're expanding all over the globe as well.
And how does it feel to be kind of part of this change?
Wild. So we saw a problem that needed fixing, and we set about doing it. We didn't anticipate this level of growth, but it's fantastic to see because I've worked in the renewable industry for a long time, and I've seen its peaks and troughs. But it seems like the demand is there now. The mainstream consciousness is there, and people want renewable energy in their homes. They want to take control of their own power.
Yeah. And are you getting the help that you need from the council and the like? Make some demands.
Do you know what we do? We get a lot of support from the local government, and we get a lot of support from at the minute. There's never been a better time to get solar. It's 0% VAT at the moment on solar and battery storage, and because of the cost of energy, having solar can reduce your bills quite dramatically.
Is there a bit of a symbiosis here between the kind of authorities and the businesses, Martin?
There is, yes. I mean, it's important. We're only going to decarbonise this by growing the businesses that are involved in this area, in the tech area. So it's important for us as an authority to work with the colleges and the providers and our own training bodies to actually make sure that the courses are there for people, that they can get trained and they can then actually go into the businesses, because it's small businesses make up a vast majority of the economy of the city.
How difficult is it to find the right people?
It's difficult. We're managing, but we have got a skills gap, not just locally, but in the whole country. To decarbonise that many homes and to decarbonise the country like we do, we're going to need a lot of upskilling.
You were telling me earlier about an electrician who's got, how many people on his books?
I know one electrician who's got 400 on his waiting list for solar panels just in Yorkshire.
Wow, that's extraordinary, isn't it? We saw in the film I made that was largely about bigger businesses, but do you think there's a role for the kind of the smaller business and in the household?
Absolutely, there's a huge role for small businesses. To decarbonise heat and transport, we're going to need a mix of all sorts, and we're going to need small businesses cropping up to support. It's like supporting the supply chain of the larger businesses. There's millions of homes out there that need that need renewable energy. We need electricians, we need electronics firmware writers, software writers. We need a whole host of industries that support it.
And do you think the sort of, if you like, the average person, for want of another word, is on this journey yet? Are they beginning to engage with this? Because in a sense, we've done some of the easy stuff. We've got big turbines, we've got nuclear power stations. They're relatively low carbon. You can flick your switch and forget. But Martin, do you think people need to think about this a little bit more? It's time to engage.
I think it is, yeah, and I think we are engaging with the residents of the city, and they're engaging with us around this, and it's a whole variety. And I think that's it. The whole decarbonisation piece is really touching people's homes and stuff. So that energy efficiency is a really important message at the moment and stuff, but it always has been. But also that change in transportation as well. So people are starting to see charge points in the city, and those are able to have electric vehicles. But some of the businesses in the city are changing. They're putting electric fleets in, so the experience of driving an electric vehicle and what that means. So it's about actually getting people familiar and understanding what these technologies are.
And briefly, are you able to sort of help them with that in terms of, I don't know, planning decisions or highways and things?
We are, yes. So we put the charge points like in our own car parks and stuff that we have within the city. But also we're running in projects with the University of Hull around air source heat pumps. We've got one large manufacturer in the city that's set up its own training body for so it's happening.
Training is absolutely key, as you mentioned earlier, Jordan. But what about government policy? Overall, what is it you want to see and perhaps haven't seen quite enough of in recent years?
I think the key word is consistency. We just need to see some consistency. We don't want anything pulling from us right now. I mean, if it could stay at 0% VAT for getting solar and batteries, then bonus, because then people have got the confidence to invest in the smaller businesses, to take on those extra staff, to upskill, to train. But if it's very choppy, it's difficult to make those solid decisions.
And just explain why, when it's choppy, as you call it, it can be so damaging for a business, briefly.
Yeah, because I was around when we had the feed-in tariff, when it was at its peak, and people were getting solar installed because they were getting paid by the government to have that. But then, so electricians were popping up all over the place, fitting lots and lots of panels. Economy was booming, everybody was happy, but then all of a sudden the government slashed the tariffs. And when they make drastic decisions like that, businesses go out of business.
But it was a very generous subsidy, and that couldn't go on forever, could it?
I agree. A heavily subsidised industry is not a buoyant industry, but there's a balance. It's just got to be incremental, and it's got to be consistent.
And very briefly, what about that messaging from government as well as policy? How important is it we keep that consistent, that climate change matters?
It does. I mean, it's incredibly important we get that consistency of message that shows, net zero is where we're going, and everything is supportive of that in terms of government messages, in terms of policy, because that gives people confidence, it gives individuals confidence, gives businesses confidence, and gives investors confidence, and that's what we need to actually make the change.
Martin, Jordan, thank you very much indeed, and not a bad day to be waterside here in Hull, was it?
Beautiful, isn't it?
Well, you can scan the QR code on your screen and listen to a special episode of the Sky News Daily Podcast with Chloe Culpan and our own climate change and energy correspondent, Hannah Thomas-Peter. They'll be discussing what Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak have promised, or not, to tackle the climate crisis. You can subscribe to the Daily for free wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up after the break, Tom Clark has been looking at whether we have the right grid, the right wires in place to connect green tech and get it doing its decarbonising job. And we'll raise our eyes beyond the horizon to see how Hull fits in to the national picture. Welcome back to The Climate Show. Before the break, we were looking at climate-friendly breakthroughs and challenges facing this most industrial of estuaries, the Humber. And I found an excuse to drive a mobility scooter crossed with a tank. But how does what's happening here relate to our net zero by 2050 goal, and what might be holding back the low-carbon tide? It's time for another session of the TomTom Club, today with our science editor, Tom Clark. Tom, welcome. Very nice to see you in person, I must say.
Hi again, Tom. How are you?
Good, thanks. We discussed earlier on the fact that there's a lot of aspiration to clean up these dirty industries, but some of the big infrastructure, hydrogen in, carbon out, big pipes, just not there yet.
They are the biggest challenges and the ones I think we've got the least answers on. Moving carbon dioxide around is something that sounds simple. The technology, we sort of know what to do, but no one's actually ever really done it anything like the scale we'd need to make an industrial cluster work like this. Once you've moved the carbon dioxide around, where do you put it? Now, we know it can stay in offshore oil and gas fields, but what kind of oil and offshore gas fields? How close are they? How expensive is it going to be to get there? And how long will it stay there for once you put it down in the ground? It's a lot of work to do, a lot of problems to solve, and we haven't really started tackling them yet.
And there is a bit of government policy here, isn't there? I think it's £1 billion over quite a few years, but there's been a bit of stop-start here.
It certainly has. I mean, there was £1 billion available to solve the CCS problem, the carbon capture and storage problem, about a decade ago. That became available, and then just before companies sort of bid into it, time of national crisis, the rug was pulled, the money went away, and that set everyone back quite a long time. The Treasury has recommitted, there is a £1 billion pot to see CCS at scale within the 2030s, but given our targets, that's quite a long way off, and there's still a lot of problems to solve.
But does it make sense to be bringing these things together in these so-called clusters?
Absolutely, and it's not by accident. They are not happening organically. There is a plan in place to try and bring these clusters together. There's some opportunities there, basically. If you've got heavy industry there already, which we have in this area, you've got lots of renewable electricity coming in from offshore in the North Sea in this lovely breeze. You've also got places you could put gas, into the North Sea, for example. There are companies that could share resources in terms of storing that. They could share pipe network. If you've got hydrogen in the mix as well, you could have a hub for generating that and then users sharing it. It all makes sense. There is funding in place for these clusters, but lots of little challenges to solve along the way.
And I'm guessing some of the planning decisions are easier here in these more industrial landscapes than they might be in the cute areas of the southeast. But how do we connect what's happening here to the rest of the country?
So, yeah, I mean, centralising stuff in a cluster is all well and good, and that's very important. These are going to be the laboratories where we solve lots of these problems that ultimately might be extended more broadly across the UK. But there's a bigger challenge. How do you get all this new renewable electricity around Britain with a national grid infrastructure that was designed around large fossil fuel power plants humming away constantly day and night? When the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, that raises big problems for the grid, and they're getting bigger as we put more renewables onto the grid. Also, the challenge is looming because we're consuming more electricity. Think about our electric cars and our air source heat pumps that we're switching away from boilers. That presents challenges. And in our report for your programme, we went and looked at exactly how people are starting to think about addressing that issue. We won't get far towards a zero carbon energy future without a lot more of these. Huge banks of batteries connected directly to the electricity grid.
So if there's instability in the grid or the shocks to the system, that's really where batteries comes in. And intermittent renewable energy is a critical part of our net zero future.
Yeah.
But it has to be stabilised, and batteries are one of the best ways, or probably the best way at the moment.
This battery at Cowley substation near Oxford is huge. It can store and release 50 megawatts of electricity, enough for thousands of homes. It's pioneering too, combining fast and powerful lithium batteries with a new type of liquid battery called a vanadium flow cell. Not quite as much oomph as lithium, but it can be charged and recharged almost infinitely without a loss of performance.
It's a lower power density, but it really complements the lithium-ion battery, enabling us to not only trade power, but also manage frequency in a much more efficient way, and also limits the wear and tear on the lithium-ion battery. Massive batteries like this are going to be increasingly important as we put more and more renewables onto our electricity grid to fill in the gaps on the days when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing. But storage of power is also going to become more important as our demand for electricity rises. Take electric vehicles. This is Europe's most powerful electric car charging hub, connected directly to the Oxford battery. Just as well, 3 cars plugged into these superchargers at the same time draw more power than 100 homes. If you add the demands of electrically powered air source heat pumps into the mix, you can start to see why electricity demand is projected to double by 2050. Are we going to need more storage like this?
So we're going to need a lot more grid because the places where we need electricity and the big cities and the big industrial centres are not normally near where the new supplies of electricity will be, which is where it tends to be really windy. Offshore, off the coast of Scotland,
And while the government has been pretty clear in setting out its plans for low-carbon electricity generation from things like more wind farms, how it's going to redesign the grid with all the backup power and storage we're going to need is less clear.
We've got no time to waste, but the government has recently put out a consultation on what that future electricity market arrangements might work, and that is a much needed step. What's really important for the new government coming in is that they do not lose any momentum, because the grid we've got at the moment is creaking a bit. It's under pressure, and therefore getting these reforms in place is absolutely, and getting on with it is a really urgent, pressing issue for the new government.
Fascinating point that about re-engineering the grid. I mean, I hear it a lot as I go around the countryside of people with all sorts of renewable energy projects that they just can't get on because the wires aren't there.
That is a big challenge. You know, we've got the trunk cables, the national grid, which is the kind of the backbone of the network. But what about all the peripheral nerves, the ones that go into people's homes? Some of them are very, very old. Some of them are being put in underpowered. There's a big challenge for those smaller network operators to how they're going to plug more energy hungry homes into the grid, and challenge how everyone's going to pay for it.
Yeah, and do we think the government kind of gets this as a potential area for government funding, or are they relying on the market to do it?
Now, some players in this thing said the market can do this alone. So EDF Renewables, who we were speaking to with that big battery, for example, that runs completely without subsidy. They can exploit ups and downs in the grid to make plenty of money to roll out many, many more of those across the country, and they have ambitions to do that. But other parts of this are not going to pay for themselves, and they will need investment. Now, is that going to be direct investment? I very much doubt it, because that's not been the political direction of travel for a long time. So what is the market-based mechanism to do it? One thing the government has been urged to do for a long time is reform the way we buy and sell electricity. Right now, it's all pegged to the price of natural gas, and as anyone paying an electricity bill at the moment knows, that is a ridiculous thing.
It seems to me that the grid is in some ways a sort of unseen nervous system of the country. It ought to be kind of more known. It ought to be kind of our map, because it does really matter. But I wonder if politicians sort of struggle to put money to it. They'd rather put, you know, new train lines, for instance, or other new glamorous things.
And it is complicated, and it's also changing quite quickly. So we looked at battery storage, but we're going to need ways of storing power for much longer periods of time, possibly even seasonally, you know, as we have different high pressure like we had this summer. There's not very much wind around, but you've got a bit of solar. How do you design a grid that's going to be truly flexible? What are your long-term power storage technologies? How do you design a grid around that when you don't really know what that grid's going to be doing in 20 years' time?
And we've had a lot of Hull favouritism here. Just briefly, where else in the country is looking to similar changes?
There are other clusters too. You know, in Teesside, there's work going on there. The northwest of England, also in Scotland, these hubs for innovation, for trying out these technologies, and also drawing the brains that we need to try and solve the problems.
Tom Clark, thanks very much indeed. Well, that's all for this week, and the last in this run of programmes. But we'll be back, and we want your help. If you scan the QR code here, you can go to our website and ask any questions about climate change, and are there any stories we should be covering? You'll have noticed we're particularly interested in solutions to climate change. What should we be talking about and answering when we come back? But that's it for now. Goodbye from Humberside.